To understand this fluid shift from the capillary endothelium to the interstitium, you have to understand the Starling's equation. This part is the capillary endothelium and this is a alveolar wall and this space is the interstitium. Here you have lymphatic channels. This is the normal anatomical part. Now look at the Starling forces which balances the fluid between the capillary and the interstitium. You have to have the hydrostatic pressure of the capillary and the hydrostatic pressure of the interstitium. These two major forces are there. Next comes the oncotic pressure of the capillary endothelium and oncotic pressure of the interstitial fluid. This balance between these forces decides the amount of fluid which comes into the interstitium, and there is a safety factor with lymph. If excess fluid comes, it drains via lymph and goes into the lymphatic channel. This is how a fluid balance happens. Now look at these four major factors. What are the factors which retains the fluid in the capillary endothelium and what are the forces which brings the fluid to the interstitium? This is the capillary lumen and this is the interstitium. Okay. Now, three forces try to move the fluid out of the capillary. That is capillary hydrostatic pressure, interstitial hydrostatic pressure and your oncotic pressure of the interstitium. Three forces move the fluid out of the capillary endothelium. And the force which retains the fluid in the capillary endothelium is your plasma oncotic pressure. So, three forces move the fluid out of the capillary endothelium and one force retains the fluid in the capillary endothelium. Now, let us look at the value of each forces. The normal capillary hydrostatic pressure is 30 millimeter of mercury. The interstitial fluid pressure is -3 millimeter of mercury and your plasma oncotic pressure is 28 millimeter of mercury and your interstitial oncotic pressure is around 8 millimeter of mercury. These three forces will try to move the fluid into the interstitium and the oncotic pressure will try to hold the fluid in the capillary endothelium. If you look at the net hydrostatic pressure, that is 30 plus minus 3 will be 33 millimeter of mercury. So, there is a force of 33 millimeter of mercury which shifts the fluid from the capillary endothelium to the interstitial space. And if you look at the osmotic pressure, the osmotic pressure is 28 minus 8. It is 20 millimeter of mercury. So, a force of 20 millimeter of mercury is trying to retain the fluid inside the capillary endothelium. So, the net outward force is 33 and the net inward force is 20 millimeter of mercury. So, if you combine together, there is a force of 13 millimeter of mercury which shifts the fluid from the capillary endothelium into the interstitial space. Now, let us look at what happens at the venous end. In the venous end, the forces are same except that the capillary hydrostatic pressure is only 10 millimeter of mercury. Your interstitial fluid pressure, the oncotic pressure of the plasma and the interstitium remains the same. If you combine this filtration pressure, the hydrostatic pressure which moves the fluid out of the capillary endothelium is only 13 millimeter of mercury, but the osmotic pressure which retains the fluid in the capillary endothelium is around 20 millimeter of mercury. If you take these two values together, there is a force of 7 millimeter of mercury which retains the fluid in the capillary endothelium. This point you have to understand.